This is Heavenscape, Year 1, the Strathmore Chronicles, brought to you by Saturday Night Gaming. The Strathmore Chronicles, written by Tony and Jessica Stevens, narrated by Tony Stevens and Jessica Stevens. Gloom, Episode 3, The Black Knight. The war horn ceased, leaving in its wake a deafening silence. All around them the mindless masses of Sheol cowered and wept. Arthur Strathmore's head was aching, and he could feel the Black Knight's gaze, and his hatred. The old warrior recognized it. It felt familiar. Finally the Black Knight moved. He lifted his massive sword with both hands, pointing it at Strathmore, and took a step forward. The ground quaked as the enormous defender of Sheol began to cross the great distance. The crowd of inhabitants broke apart, scattering before this demonic guardian. As the Black Knight thundered past, smoky shadows seeped from the joints of his armor. The inky darkness gathered around the cowering men and women, and they began to convulse and howl. It lifted the ill-fated souls, twisting their bodies, forming and shaping itself, hardening into the black armor of the guards. The smoke cleared slowly, and in its place stood an army of soldiers, bound to the will of their master. Vel turned to Arthur. "We need to leave this place. Now!" "Yeah, saw that coming," the old warrior grumbled, still holding his throbbing head. The Dark Knight lumbered toward them, his army of shadow soldiers growing with each and every step. The smoke was traveling faster, tendrils reaching for the crowd in all directions. "That gate looks like our only way out of here." Arthur gestured at the now unguarded gate. "Yes." Vel turned to the strangers gathered around them. "But we can't just leave them to die." Arthur Strathmore looked around at the strangers he had chosen as his allies in this strange land. In each of them he recognized the same feeling of loss and confusion that gnawed at his consciousness. Vel was right. They were a team now. "Mud!" Arthur called. "Mud, boy, how do you feel about distracting old Hornhead over there?" "I don't know," Mud paled. "I'm not really a fighter or anything." "Well, how long do you think you could hold out against him?" Arthur asked.
"We will help him hold this thing at bay. Just hurry with whatever you have planned."
Rin stepped forward, sweeping her long crimson hair over her shoulders and drawing her rapier. Emery and Tilk joined her as Strathmore, Vel, and the man in black coat began to work their way along the outskirts of the murky port town. As they approached the gate, Vel reached out, grasping Strathmore by the arm. Channeling his energy through their connection, he linked their minds. Arthur heard the calm voice of his elven companion in his mind.
"I am with you. Do what must be done, and I will guard you."
"What the?" Arthur narrowed his eyes suspiciously at the elf. "Fine, but next time ask me before you probe my brain, boy." Arthur approached the massive gate. There didn't appear to be a lock or any hinges, no indication of how it opened. Arthur reached up to give the metal a shake. A chaotic, crackling energy reverberated out. The dark man in the cloak was knocked unmoving to the ground. "Hey! This thing is attacking us!" Strathmore shouted. Arthur felt his energy blazing with each wave of attack. The old warrior clenched his teeth and tightened his grip on the iron bars. The phoenix on his arm blazed to life, and his fists were engulfed in flames. The bars around his hands began to glow red hot. The heat spread out until the entire gate was bright hot, and the air around it shimmered with heat. Still, it did not melt. The attack waves grew stronger. Arthur felt his power flare with his rage, and he struggled to contain it. It felt as if his entire body was on fire. With a roar, he ripped away from the gate and drew the Irtus blade from his back. The sword lit instantly, bright blue and white hot, and Arthur Strathmore swung with all the fury of the inferno. With a loud groan, the mangled bars gave way, and the two halves of the gate crashed to the ground. Arthur backed away from the smoldering gate, his chest heaving, his left eye blazing. Beyond the gate he could see open fields, green and peaceful. He could hear a bird chirping in the distance, and a warm breeze carried the heady scent of wheat fields. A peace and calm spread over the grizzled warrior, and he wanted nothing more than to step forward into it. He turned to beckon his allies forward, and found a scene from a nightmare. The mindless shadow soldiers stretched to the horizon. He could barely see the small group he had left behind. They were circled up, back to back, fighting for their lives. The horde was relentless. As soon as one fell, another took its place. As the Black Knight reached them, however, the rest of the horde fell back into his enormous shadow. The clamor of war was replaced with a deathly stillness. The mighty foe stopped in front of the unlikely group of warriors and lifted his greatsword, a blade larger than any man. He could easily cleave through all three of them in one strike. As he slashed down, a streak of black raced toward him and leapt onto his arm. Emery's scream shattered the silence as the massive knight slung the wolf across the now empty field of battle. On the steps of the broken gate, Strathmore knew he had to do something. It was his fault they were trapped.
Arthur, let me help.
Vel spoke in his mind. The moon elf's eyes began to glow a bright white as he gathered his magic. With a cry in a language Arthur didn't recognize, Vel began releasing volley after volley of bright yellow bolts across the battlefield. A malicious grin split Strathmore's face as he watched the Black Knight stumble under the barrage of magic. The grizzled warrior brought up his burning blade. As if it knew what he wanted it to do, the mighty claymore flared, its flames mirroring Arthur's own rage. Heat shimmered around the old warrior as he roared and hurled his attack. The burning blast scorched through the air at the Black Knight and exploded in a firestorm of blinding white light. The Black Knight roared. His armor was charred and smoking. Turning his back on the small group of fighters, his gaze settled on the warrior and the elf standing by the twisted ruins of the massive gate.
His gaze is upon me, Arthur. Now's your chance. Go!
Vel's voice echoed in his head. The sorcerer began to gather his energy for another spell. No longer moving slowly, the Black Knight dragged his sword along the ground as he charged towards Vel. The ground shook with the impact of his steps. Just as Vel moved to release his strongest attack, he screamed and staggered to his knees. "What are you doing, you pointy-eared idiot?" The elf was clutching his head, screaming in pain and anguish. "Get up!" Arthur roared. The terrible enemy reached Vel and brought his great sword around in a tremendous sweeping arc. Arthur Strathmore watched with horror and disbelief as Vel was cut down. He felt the elf's consciousness leave his mind and the empty space left behind. Vel's body fell to the ground, his blood spraying onto Arthur. Strathmore fell to his knees next to his friend's lifeless body. "I could not save you, but I swear I will avenge you." His choking rage and pain of losing someone important felt familiar, yet he couldn't remember why. Since arriving in Sheol, anger was the only thing he had felt. Every other emotion was muted here, dulled like the mindless inhabitants of this place. The seething hatred washed over him like a caress, igniting every nerve of his body, replacing his grief with intoxicating power. Seizing that rage, Arthur Strathmore stood. His Iratus blade flared into a deep blue as he turned and faced the soulless terror. "You evil beast! He was my only friend! For Vel!" The Black Knight's counterattack was almost lazy as he curled his massive gauntlet and swatted at the enraged warrior. Arthur was flung back, and his body slammed into one side of the broken gate. The dark man in the black coat rushed past him, almost a blur. He lunged into the air, and his body seemed to change. Claws ripped through his gloves, and his chest barreled out as the muscles of his arms widened. His thrashing claws sparked along the Black Knight's armor. The enemy reacted quickly but deliberately, catching the beast man by the throat. The Black Knight held him in the air, outstretched in front of him. The horned monstrosity turned his head and looked directly at Arthur as it snapped the man's neck and flung his limp body to the ground. Arthur Strathmore threw back his head and roared. He gathered his kindling of wrath and hatred, allowing it to pulse through him. His eye began to glow like an ember, and he grinned wickedly. He felt his body shimmering with heat, and the shape of his hands was now lost in a blaze of crimson flame. Rushing toward his enemy, the old warrior slammed his palm into the faceplate of the Black Knight's helmet. He yanked down as hard as he could, his fire burning brighter. The massive helmet crumbled under Strathmore's rage, and the behemoth was forced to his knees. Face to face with his enemy, Arthur leaned in close and released a mighty roar. Rin saw her chance and launched up, landing on the knight's back. Her rapier found a weakness in the Black Knight's armor, and in one swift motion she thrust down with all of her weight. The red-haired warrior leapt free, rolling as she hit the ground. Strathmore ripped the helmet from the knight's head with his hands blazing. The helmet melted between his fingers, and he screamed in rage. As the Black Knight's formless gaze pierced Arthur, he finally recognized the beast before him. Commander Arthur Strathmore found himself staring into the eyes of his greatest foe, Lord Bloodrage. The mighty reptilian warrior was the chieftain of the Draken War Tribe, a barbaric, hostile species who had slaughtered countless Elorians during Strathmore's years on the front lines of the Elorian-Draken War. The large creature who knelt before Arthur was mortally wounded. Its black armor dissipated into smoke, revealing the battered and bloody foe. His dark scales were pierced in several places along his back, and one of his horns was broken and jagged. Slowly and deliberately, channeling years of anger and conflict between their species, Commander Strathmore thrust his blade into the massive reptile's chest. The beast let out a piteous wail and crashed to the ground. Strathmore stepped towards his fallen enemy. Almost in a trance, he crouched over the massive corpse. Something was calling to him. Arthur found himself reaching for a large ring on Bloodrage's finger. It slid effortlessly into the old warrior's palm. The thick silver band was embedded with a shining black gemstone that pulsed with chaotic power. This must have been the source of the Black Knight's power and his ability to raise the denizens of this place to be his dark guardsmen. Could it resurrect his friend? Arthur Strathmore slowly slid the black ring onto his middle finger of his right hand. Instantly, the old warrior felt a rush of power course through his veins. Every muscle and tendon in his body felt supercharged with energy. Gathering Vel into his arms, he felt the weight of his friend's terrible death. Arthur balled up his fists, placed the ring against Vel's chest, and poured all of his willpower into the ring.
Come on, you stupid magic ring! Do something!
He growled desperately. A flash of dark, crackling energy blasted out from the ring. Vel's corpse dissolved as an all-encompassing chaos energy rippled out from Arthur's hand. The old warrior screamed in rage and sorrow. The ground ripped free from gravity and energy cascaded around Arthur like lightning forged from the shadows. His screams turned to agony as the blackened veins began to spread across his hand and up his arm. Growing thicker and faster, they clawed their way across his flesh. Every inch of his body burned, and the ropes of dark veins creeped up his neck. Arthur Strathmore howled into the sky as the chaos energy tore his body apart. The violent outburst was over as quickly as it began. The ground was charred and devastated from the explosion, and a great crater, still smoking, marked the spot where the old warrior had knelt.